welcome to part 2 of the April 13th week of the Southwest Tennessee Community College weather class. This is mesothermal and microthermal climates this go round. So starting out with the mesothermal, as the name implies, it means middle temperatures, which means we have temps that are not too hot, not too cold. We've finally moved away from the tropics and are now in the mid-latitudes, and so we're going to be actually seeing more of a true summer wintertime temperature pattern that goes up. And the mesothermals, we're going to have two bands of these. We're going to have the mid-latitude band in the northern hemisphere and a mid-latitude band of it down in this southern hemisphere. All right. Now, ones I want to point out is what we are here in Memphis. Okay, so we're mesothermal in Memphis, and we are the one that is called subtropical. You're going to see that is the one that's in the whole southeast part of the USA, along with the southeast part of China over there. It extends a little further inland over there in China. We've got some on the eastern coast area in South America, and what may be hard to see, there's an itty bitty little area right there on the eastern coast down there in South Africa. Actuality that is going on there for the subtropical climates. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the subtropical climates because these are the ones that you guys know. This is what we live in right here and in Memphis. So you're very familiar with it. You want to know what it's like, just look out of the winter. I mean, outside of the window right there. We get year-round precipitation. During the winter half of the year, we tend to get the frontal systems that come through, like today, where we get tons and tons and tons of rain. But even in the summer times, which can be just, a tad drier oftentimes than the winter area, but we still get plenty of rain from those scattered afternoon convectional thunder showers that do pop up. We've got a mix of forests of both, some pine trees and evergreens, but lots of deciduous hardwoods that you see around. And throughout most of the world, in China, over here in the US, many of these lands, same thing down in South America, have been used for farming. And the native trees that normally cover this area have been cut down and turned into cropland. So the trees that you see, especially here in the southeast United States, we got lots of forests, but with a few rare exceptions, most of those are less than 100 years old because literally everything was cut down for farm fields at some point in time. So even our, Shelby Forest area, again, all, used to be cropland that went on. So now we've got, of course, our winters are mild, our summers are hot and humid and muggy, and we have a lot of the up and down weather that we know, how it's hot one day and cold the next day and hot one day and cold the next day here within the fall and the spring. That's all very typical of our weather that we find here. Now, with all this rain, and with the warm temperatures and what end up being long growing seasons, many of these climates here, the subtropical, actually grow the most food in all the places because you get plenty of rain, and again, you can often get two crops that go on. I mean, I'm already planting plants out in my garden right now. I don't do the crop thing, but I've got some flowers and stuff that are still going out there, and they will often, they'll keep on blooming up until, October, November sometimes before we get our first frost. So it's basically, they'll say that the subtropical underneath the mesothermal grows the most food for the most people, all right, because of these long types of growing seasons. All righty. Okay, now the other two subclimates that fall underneath these. These are mostly going to be found over on the west coast areas, okay? And the first one is called Mediterranean. And as the name implies, the best place to see the example of this subclimate is going to be around the Mediterranean Sea that goes on here, all right? But we also see them on the west coasts of the continent, so both North and South America. There's a little bit over here and down here in the southern reaches of Africa. There's just not too much of Africa that is in the mid-latitudes, okay, that we see going on over there. The Mediterranean are going to be on the more lower end of the mid-latitudes for all of these, okay? So Chile down in South America, we've got basically California, the whole coastal area of California for us over here, and then again the whole Mediterranean from Italy and the south of France and parts of Spain and parts of Turkey and Syria and Israel and even some of the coastal regions here on the northern part of Africa are going to all be this Mediterranean climate. Let me back up for 1 minute, and I forgot to give you, again, the qualifications to be a mesothermal climate. Your warmest month has got to be greater than 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and your coldest month is going to be somewhere between 64.4 degrees Fahrenheit and freezing. All right, so we're on the warmer end of these mid-latitude climates. We have very mild winters that usually go on. Now, the Mediterranean climates are often described as the most perfect climate in all the world. This is Southern California, Los Angeles, Hollywood. You're very familiar with it because you've seen it in 1,000 TV shows and movies all the time. Mediterraneans have a very dry summer. I'm just going to show you an example on a climograph just so you can see this. All right. This one right here is San Francisco, California, and then this one is in Spain, Sevilla, all right? And you can see with the rainfall down here that you do have a short, dry period where they get very little rain, but you do get rain during the rest of the year, enough to make up for that. So we're still considered a humid climate that goes on. Now, the reason that these areas from here and here and down here have, and there's like an itty bitty one, I think, down here in Australia, but the reason for their dry summer is going back to our pressure belts yet once again. All of these areas are under the influence of that subtropical high pressure in both hemispheres in the summer months. All right, so that's the reason it's so dry, and that's why you have sunny Southern California all the time, and it's a very predictable weather pattern in the summer. It's going to be nice out. It can get very warm during the day, but at night it's going to get quite cool because, again, there, not much rain at the time. Humidity levels, the mugginess is very, very low, and even in the middle of the summer, even though it might get up to 100 degrees during the day, it can get down into the 50s at night. So if you're going to go to Disneyland here in Anaheim, California, even if it's in the summer, you want to be sure to take a sweater if you're going to watch the fireworks late at night. This is very different from if you go to Disney World in Florida, which is the subtropical climate, which we know is all as muggy as all get out. And the last thing you're going to be wearing in July is a sweater, unless it's just to keep the mosquitoes away. So we know how that goes. All right, so back to Mediterranean. That goes on. Now, in the wintertime, again, the pressure belts are going to shift, all right, down like, am I got this right? Yep, okay. We'll be shifting down. And these areas are going to be under the influence of those prevailing westerlies, okay, those surface winds, so you can see. All right, and so in the wintertime, the winds are going to be blowing across the ocean, and that's going to bring moisture, and that's when they're going to get rain in all these areas. All right, so even though you might think you're in a desert in the summertime, yes, you'll get the plenty, you know, of rains that come down. Now, they're still going to get less rain on a yearly basis than we do here in the subtropical climates, but of course it's not low enough to be considered a true arid climate that goes on anything like this. All right. Things that you find, frost is very uncommon in the Mediterranean climates, and you often have the foggy coasts from those advective currents that we've talked about before. One of the plants are, funny name, is called sclerophyllus, which means the hard-lived leaved type plants. If you've ever had, you're familiar with aloe, all right? That's a good example of this, and the whole purpose of that is to retard moisture loss during those dry times. There's a really cool tree, if you have a chance to look it up, it's called Palo Verde, which means green stick. And it is a tree that has chlorophyll in its branches. And so its branches and trunks is actually green. And during the drier months, it can drop all of its leaves, which use up a lot of water, but it can still photosynthesize from the chlorophyll that's in the branches. It's really kind of cool that goes on. The general type of plants, just a catch-all name that you see in these areas, it's known as chaparral, all right? So you can look this up online and look at pictures of it, but it's a lot of low, scrubby bushes that are very well adapted to the dry summers, and they can muddle through those and then come back once the rains are very gone. Now, the problem with the chaparral, it's not necessarily the most attractive looking of plants. Again, it's scrubby looking bushes that goes on. And so what people will do, and this is especially an issue in Southern California, where there's, you know, we do have mountain slopes and stuff that look over there, and they like to build on these and build houses on the slopes, all right? Well, they want pretty plants, so they dig up all the chaparral, all right, this thick stuff, and they plant either regular grass or, you know, your pretty little flowers. Well, guess what? Most of those will croak during the drought time in the summer, and that leaves the soils on the slopes very bare, okay, because the native vegetation has been dug up. The plants, the non-native pretty plants they planted, croaked. You have bare soils, okay? So the rains come in the wintertime, turn those bare soils on a slope into mud, and guess what happens? All the mud slides down. You get all the mudslides, and you hear about those oftentimes. And that's strictly due to basically people being stupid and trying to fill in, you know, non-native stuff and, you know, that they like instead of what's normally in that area. You do find pines common. You do have trees, but you don't have any thick forests or anything like this because there's just not enough moisture. As far as crops go, you see the same type plants all over. Most of them originated way over here, you know, both in the Middle Eastern areas that are known over here, and then were brought over to the similar climates in the New Worlds, and that's your grapes, your figs, and your olives, those typical Mediterranean diet type plants that you hear a lot about. It's supposed to be very good and healthy for you, all right? But that's what we see growing in these types of areas, all right? So where we find those, like I said, Southern California, in kind of middle part of Chile that goes on over there, and then again, all the Mediterranean areas. That's an easy one to remember. Now, the last one that we're going to talk about on mesothermal is known as, if I can get the right, it's the Marine West Coast, all right? This is also on the West Coast, as the name Marine West Coast implies. So this one's easy to remember. Now, these actually occur just, you know, a little more poleward from the Mediterranean. So here in North America, we're going to see them up in the Pacific Northwest, all right? So Washington or Oregon and Washington, up into British Columbia, and then up into the southern coastal areas of Alaska, all right? Now, here in North America, these Marine West Coast is going to be confined to, you know, within, I don't know, 200 miles or so of the coast, Because of the mountain ranges that are found all along here. They do act as a barrier and will confine it. On the back far side of the mountain ranges is where we're going to be seeing those steplands that we talked about, the prairies and stuff like this. But up here we have the marine west coast. Now, we see it down in southern Chile, way down here on the tip. All right, so in this area down here. We see it in Europe. It covers a much broader area than it does in the Americas, because down in Chile, you've also got the Andes Mountains, which act as the barrier, and plus you don't even have a whole lot of land down there anyway for it to stretch. Now, most of Western Europe is the marine west coast. So not only is it found along the coastal areas here, it's also found pretty far inland, all right? Which you'll see when you're looking at the maps that go over there. So we're talking, Ireland, the United Kingdom, even all the way up here into Norway, all right? That you will see these. You also see it way over here in New Zealand as well. This section of New Zealand falls within the marine west coast. Hallmarks of marine west coast. These are still mesothermal climates, okay? Even though some of these are way up, almost like near the Arctic Circle or Antarctic Circle, okay? So, we're talking like Alaska. If you follow Norway all the way over, we're in parts of Greenland and in parts of, cold Canada, where they're still having the more mild temperate climates that are going on over here. All right. These guys are always under the influence of those prevailing westerlies, blowing the warmish, wet air right onto them. All right. So these places have lots and lots of rain. They are infamous for being the rainiest, the foggiest, the cloudiest of climates. We get more total rain per year than they do, but they have many more rainy days than we do. But instead of getting the big thunderstorms and frontal systems that we get, their rain tends to be just more light, drizzly rain all the frickin' time. All right, often. Their number of sunny days can sometimes be less than a month or even a week total on a yearly basis that goes on. All right, their summers are cooler than ours, but they also have a very short or a very low temperature range, especially because these areas on the coast. We know the marine effect has that effect just about everywhere. Where it's going to keep temps from being too hot or too cold, and so you have a very small temperature range versus what you see mid-continent, where you start getting the much larger temperature ranges. All right, so they're cooler, but it doesn't get really cold. You might get frost on occasion, but snow you don't usually get snow, and things like this. Now, the reason that we have such warmer temperatures at an unexpected high latitudes over here in Europe has to do with the currents, the ocean currents that we've talked about before. All right, and going back to that current map, all right, I lost my pen here. All right, what starts out as the Gulf Stream for us along our eastern coast goes all the way over here to Europe, and just like a lot of the streets here in Memphis, it's the same body of water, but they changed the name, and they call it the North Atlantic Drift. But you can see it's still a warm current that is flowing right over here past the British Isles and even all the way up into Norway. All right, that keeps a lot of the temperatures slightly above the freezing temp, especially the water temps. So you would think that in these areas up in Norway, which are very high latitudes, the same thing over here in Alaska, that you would have frozen over or, frozen solid ports and harbors, but you don't, all right? Because again, keep in mind, it doesn't have to be super duper warm, it just has to be above freezing. So if it stays, 40 degrees or 35 degrees, there, the water is going to be too warm to freeze over, all right? So that's one of the unique things about the marine West Coast. Now, with all the rain, plants love rains, just like the tropical rainforests thrive with all the year-round rain that they get down there. We also have temperate rainforests in these areas. So if you've ever watched Star Wars, which by now you should have seen some of them, but a lot of the forest scenes, especially the Forest Moon of Endor with the Ewoks, that was filmed up here in British Columbia. Lots of TV shows are filmed up there as well, because Canada's got a good deal for people to film up there. And so TV shows are filmed up here. You'll see this a whole lot. So you're probably familiar with these big, big temperate rainforests where bear and grizzlies roam, and again, lots of ferns. It looks very different from your tropical rainforests. But yeah, again, take a look at them on, just Google some of the pics for those types of things, and that you'll see there. All right, so, but yeah, now in all these areas that actually have mountains that do come down, so all of Alaska here, and again, our entire northwest coast, we've got mountain ranges. We've got the Andes down here, what is their southwest coast, all right? In Norway, there are mountain ranges that come down to the sea. And about 10,000 years ago, so at the end of the last glacial period, there were huge mountain glaciers that, all that moisture turned into ice because the climate was colder then, and gouged out what are called fjords. Now that the glaciers have retreated, they've left these big, giant U-shaped valleys that actually go down into the sea, but the sea levels rose when the last of the big mountain glaciers started to melt and make what we call a fjord, right? So that's a Norwegian word. And these are very narrow inlets of the sea. When you look at any world map and you look at these areas, and you will notice that the coastlines of these particular areas are extremely jagged. All right, it's not a nice smooth coastline. It's just, it looks like crazy puzzle pieces going in. Those are the fjords. And let me show you a close-up of what I mean by a fjord. This is obviously taken in the winter time when it got colder at the higher elevations. But you see all those very narrow inlets? All right, and those used to be the paths where mountain glaciers took, but now they've been flooded by the seas and have all these narrow inlets. Those are fjords. And the fjords are just a very typical landform that you will see in marine West Coast climates. All right. In Norway, this is where the Vikings are from, and the Vikings used those narrow inlets to, they're easy to hide in, and then of course the fact that they don't freeze over meant that they can go out and sail the world and pillage and plunder and do everything that the Vikings used to do. All right. But yeah, it's the marine West Coast that can occur very far up. Now, when you think of the United Kingdom, all right, you don't usually picture a lot of snow. They get snow on occasion, but they're kind of like us. Snow's not that big of a whoop. But it doesn't get too hot, doesn't get too cold, and it's rainy all the frickin' time. So anyway, so that, again, you'll see that throughout lots of areas of France and Germany and many of these areas over here. So that is the marine West Coast that, again, we find in both hemispheres that go on. Let me see if I left anything out with those guys. All right. Nope. All right, so the last topic for today is going to be the microthermal climates. All right, make sure I got my notes up here so I don't leave anything out for you guys. Now, the microthermals are still a mid-latitude climate. They're still a temperate climate, but the difference here is that, again, the warmest month is still going to be above 50 degrees on average, but the coldest is going to be below freezing. So these are guys that have similar seasons to what we have, but they do know snow. They know how to drive on snow. They probably own ice skates. They own skis. They have tire change and snow blowers and all this type of stuff. You know, they like hockey a lot because they're used to playing that. So let me show you where these are found. All right, so here's our microthermal climates. And one thing you're going to notice is that it's only located in the northern hemisphere. We have 0 microthermal climates in the southern hemisphere. And the reason for that is because there's not enough land at those higher latitudes for the microthermal climates to suffice. All right. If there's any land that's down there in that area, it is, so small that you're going to have the marine influence, and that's going to keep temperatures much more moderate, and it's not going to get cold enough in the wintertime to be classified as a microthermal climate. All right, so we're just talking about North America here. All right, now these guys, to make it easier for you, I have kind of condensed some of the subclimates just into 2. So the less severe of these is known as humid continental. All right, and we see most of that here in the U.S. It's going to be places that are just to the north of the subtropical, of the mesothermal. So I'm talking places like Chicago and New York and Detroit, things like this that we're used to. If you think of Chicago, I know a lot of people have traveled up there. If you think of parts of New England and things like this, they've all got, some of them can have as hot and muggy as summers as we have, but we know it gets much colder in the wintertime. They're going to count on snow. They know what it's like. The slightly warmer areas, again, like Chicago or something, they kind of have the up and down winters like we do, where they'll get a snow and then it melts after about a week, and then they have slightly warmer temps, and then they get another snow. And then again, as you go further north, it's going to get even colder, and pretty much, the first snows are going to hit around October, and you're going to have snow on the ground for a while until the springtime. And so it's, they have more cool winters and stuff like this. Cool summers. There was a novel I was reading one time. I don't even remember what the name of it was, but it was set in Maine. And the very opening paragraph, they were talking about a heat wave that was going on and how god awful it was, and they didn't know how they were going to stand it, and this, and the people were going to the mountains where it was cooler, but folks stuck in the city was just dying. And then, like, the second paragraph down, they said, yeah, it's supposed to reach 80 degrees again tomorrow. How are we ever going to stand it? And I was just like, 80 is sweater weather. What are they talking about? But they were just, that's because they're used to their summers, hot summers being like 70 degrees. But it gets, much colder in the evening and stuff like this. All right. All the humid continentals that we see do tend to be, they have agriculture up there, but they don't grow quite as much as we do further in the south, just because the growing season is going to be a lot shorter. All right. These microthermals, especially the humid continental, when you talk about your stereotypical Hallmark card 4 seasons, legitimately, where you have a warm, nice, pleasant summer, and then it cools off and you get the color changes in the trees for your fall, and it's cool and you start wearing your jackets, and then by November the snows come and you have a white Christmas every time, and everybody goes out and goes, skiing or ice skating and things like this through the winter time, and then spring starts to come. It stays cold all the time, and then finally spring comes and things start to warm up, and the buds come and the rains come, and April showers bring May flowers and all this kind of thing. This is the human continentals of the microthermal climates, all right? Where you see some of the cooler ones is over in Europe, is the more Eastern Europe that goes through in this area over here, all right? And then even into like Moscow and stuff like this. Now, the second subclimate here in the microthermals, this is known as, if I can find the right list, known as the subarctic. And sometimes I slip up and call it subpolar. It's the same thing, all right? So we're still a microthermal climate. We still have a semblance of seasons, but with the subarctic, we have a very short, mild summer. Spring and fall is basically non-existent, and then we have usually up to 9 months of freaking super cold. All right, it stays cold all the time. It can get very, very cold. These areas are basically, we're talking about most of central Canada and also eastern Canada, up around these areas, all right? We do have big old Hudson Bay right here in Canada, which does keep northern Canada a bit warmer. It's still cold, but it's warmer temps than we're gonna see over here in Asia that goes on. So, middle part of Alaska, once you get above the Marian West Coast warmer climates, so mid part of Alaska is gonna fall into this subarctic. And then over here in Asia, basically this whole section of Russia, this is what we call Siberia, falls into this, all right? These are wild areas. They're very, very cold. Temperatures get very, very cold, even though they do get above 50 degrees. At least 1 month has to be above 50 degrees here. But it gets extremely cold as well. They have a lot of forests here. We call these big, thick forests, most of them are evergreens. They're plants or trees called like larches, and these are fir trees and things like this that are very well adapted to the cold. And they, we call them the boreal forests up around here in North America. And the same type of forest and trees is known as the taiga in Siberia. So I'll write that 2 words out here for you. So it's the same plants, it's just different names on different continents. All right, so boreal and taiga. These are also written on your study guides for you guys to look at as much. All right. Populations of people are pretty small in these areas because it does get so cold. Now, something we also have to keep in mind at these extremely high latitudes where this is occurring is that even in the summertime, when it's the high sun season, the sun is still very low in the sky. All right, so at noontime in these locations, the noon sun is usually about as high as it is in our wintertime. So it doesn't get near as warm as it does for other places. Summers are brief, but it can kind of get hot and things like this. Now, these locations, these subarctic locations, have the largest annual temperature range of any climate. Some of them are over, on average, an 80-degree temperature range. So a really big, huge difference between your wintertime lows and your summertime's high. The record belongs to Verkhoyansk, which it's around up here somewhere. All right. I don't have my reading glasses on and I can't find it exactly, but it's in this area right up here. It's in Siberia, all right? And it has 115 degree Fahrenheit temperature range. Goes from about a high of 60 or so degrees in the summer down to a low of minus 55 degrees in the winter. That's extremely cold. Now, they actually, both of these areas, especially Siberia, but to some extent, especially some of these areas in Canada, yes, they get snow, but they don't get that much snow because in the wintertime, these areas are going to be dominated by high pressure, right? You already know that because it's cold, you know, cold air. It sinks, it's stable, it does not lead to adiabatic cooling and does not lead to clouds. So they don't get a huge amount of snow. It's just whatever little snow they do fall stays for 8 months. All right, so you think that there is a lot there, just, you know, continues to build up the little bit that they do get during the time. Something that they do have here is permafrost. That stands for part of the soil that stays permanently frozen year round. So agriculture, you don't have that up here. Any of the people that do live here and can handle those minus 55 degree winters, they are usually hunters and trappers and, you know, things like this. Fishermen and stuff like this. There are a lot of rivers that flow through these areas as well. All right. Yeah, the problem with the permafrost is now it will melt in the summertime. The upper layer, maybe about 6 feet or so, will melt and get kind of mushy. And that's not good for building houses. If you try to build some big skyscraper or something like this with that annual melting and thawing cycle that goes on and the ground swelling and then shrinking and swelling and shrinking tends to make buildings fall to their side and tends to make foundations do this bit and all kinds of things. Again, those extreme temperatures make it very difficult for industry of any kind to go on as well because they can get so cold that gasoline turns into a jelly, and so that makes it very difficult to run any kind of equipment that goes on. So yeah, the populations of people are very sparse. You do find native populations that are here, and most of the folks are like reindeer herders and, like I said, trappers and fishermen and things like this. All right, because there are a lot of critters that do live up here. The lowest recorded temperature ever was again at Verkhoyansk here in Siberia. It was minus 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That was in 1892. So that Verkhoyansk that I was telling you about, and you'll see that on your lab work as well. It has a population of about 1,300 people. It's a river port, and they do have a little airport there. But again, everybody, again, reindeer herders and fur collectors that do live there. All right. So many of these subarctic areas, even in the summer, may not have a frost-free season. Now, keep in mind, when we're looking at the temperatures, we're just looking at the average monthly temperature. That doesn't mean that, you know, that it never drops below freezing in the summertime. It just means the average temp for the whole month has to be above 50 degrees. Okay, so it's still pretty cold in areas like this. All right, so that is it for the subarctic. All right, and again, microthermal. So microthermal, we got humid continentals, and then we've got the subarctic, and only found in North America. So this will be it for these. We've got one more part 3 to come where we'll be talking about the polar and the highland climates. But this is it for this.